Hello, today I'm going to show you how to create basic unit tests in C# using Visual Studio 2022. So right now I'm going to go and create a new project here. It'll just be a C# console app so that we can, actually it can just be a class library because we don't actually need to run anything. So yeah, let's create a class library here. It's going to be running tests. Create a class library in C#. I'll call it unit test tutorial. And create using .NET 9. So now we've got this unit test tutorial here. Now let's say you have a class. So when you unit test things, you want to have a class to test. So let's go and create one. Let's create one called solver. Solve math problems. So we've got our solver here, and we will have a public int add, int a, int b. So we can add two numbers, and yeah, we could have it return a plus b, but since we're going to be doing unit tests, let's put a bug in it and just have it always return 5. So now we have a solver class which can add two numbers and pretend to add two numbers, and it will return 5. Now we can go and create another project. We usually want to keep our unit tests in a separate project from our actual code. And we'll see if there's a unit test project, .NET, no, not .NET Framework, unit test. No, it's in here somewhere. MS test project. You can also use NUnit or XUnit if you want. They behave slightly differently, but I'll just show you with MS test. We'll call this tests. We'll call it something with tests in the name. Just leave everything at the default here, I suppose. Now we have a test project. Now in our test project, you see we now have a class test1. Let's call this solver test so that we know what we're testing. So we rename it to solver test, and we have a test method 1. Now you see the solver test is marked with test class. That means that this test class can contain test methods, and this test method 1 is called test method. Test method is basically a single unit test that you use to test a particular behavior of some sort. So let's call this add. Usually call it something similar to the name of the method that you're testing. So it's called add. We can call this add if we wanted to add multiple tests for the add method. We could add details to them, like add positive numbers, add negative numbers, whatever you want to test. But for now, let's just have a single test method called add. Now each test has 3 parts to it, so I'll put some comments here. We want arrange, act, and assert. So in the arrange phase of the test, we want to set up any objects we need to run the test. In that case here, we will say var solver equals new solver. And we need to add a reference to that. So we can add a reference to unit test tutorial main project. And now we have our solver. Now act is where we perform actions using the object to be tested. So we can say solver.add, and we'll say add 2 and 2, and get result. Now we have a result. We add 2 and 2. We've got a result from it. And now in the assert phase, we say we take that result and we verify that it's correct. Verify that actions were performed correctly. So what we do is we use the assert class in our testing toolkit. Assert, and this is not exactly what we want, but we want assert r equal. So there are a lot of methods here, r equal, r not equal, that sort of thing, or you can say assert is true if you just want to pass in like some sort of arbitrary condition. But here we can use r equal. We say what we want to expect first. So we want it to be 4 because 2 plus 2 equals 4. And then we pass in the result. So what this does here is we create a new solver. We add 2 and 2, get the result, and then check that the result is 4. So if we run this test, run all tests, it's going to fail because it's 5 and not 4. Go to our Test Explorer. It's one of our windows in here somewhere. Test Explorer. We see that our test failed, and we drill down into that, and we see that add failed. Expected 4, actual 5. So that means that, hey, our test is not working. So we might be tempted to go back here and say, okay, well, we're going to return 4, right? Okay. So, we're going to return 4. Adding 2 numbers is going to return 4, which is kind of silly. We should actually add them. Let's just say that we naively decided to fix the bug that way. So we go back to our solver test, and we run, and hey, it passes. Yay! 2 plus 2 is 4. But then some user comes along, and they run the solver, and they pass in 3 and 5. And they're like, why is it giving me 4? It's like, oh yeah, we got to actually add the numbers. So let's make another test here. Add other numbers. And we can say add 3 and 5. And we should expect that to be 8. And when we run that, we see that one of our tests fails and one passes, because it's always returning 4. So now we go back to our solver and like, okay, well, gee, we got to actually fix this. We can't just return 4 all the time. Why don't we just actually add those numbers? So we'll say return A plus B, and we run our test. Go back to Test Explorer, and they both pass. So that's kind of like the basics of unit testing. You find some behavior in your program you want to test. You isolate it in a single class, a single method, and then in your test class, you create methods to test different scenarios. So this one tests that 2 plus 2 is 4. This one tests that 3 plus 5 is 8. When they both pass, you got a pretty good idea that, hey, it's adding correctly. So that is the basics of unit tests. Let me show you one more thing here. Now see these little green lines here? These are from a extension for Visual Studio. I'll show you that. It's really handy. It is called, what's it called? Fine Code Coverage. You can find this in the extension gallery. And what it does is it highlights where your code is covering your tests, or your tests are covering your code. So like for instance, let's go back to our solver. See how this has little green lines? That's because I ran the test, and it actually ran these lines of code here. So you can see that, hey, your test is actually covering all scenarios. That would be like if you had like some special case here. If A is less than 0, return -1. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but let's say it did. If you run the test again, and then you go back to your solver, you see that, well, I'm not sure why it should be red. It's just not showing up at all, but yeah, it should be red there. Oh, probably because, it's not actually executed because it's always returning before that. So we do it that way. So if we go back to our solver, now we see that this is yellow because it says if it only executed one branch, that is the false branch. And then this is not getting executed because we never pass in an A less than 0. And that can help you see if your tests are actually, covering all the different bases in your code. There's also a fine code coverage window, which is in, where is it? It would be in here once you've got your plugin, your extension installed. And if you run the tests while the fine code coverage is open, then it'll show you a summary of all the code coverage in all your classes. So that will show you, whether your tests are actually executing all the code. So you see here, this is about 67% because there's some lines that are not running. but of course we don't actually want to, return -1 if a is less than 0. So we'll put this back, go here, run the tests again. And you see now our coverage is 100%. You usually want to keep your coverage as close to 100% as possible to make sure that your tests are covering all different scenarios. And that's it for now. I just wanted to show you the basics of unit tests. Hopefully this is helpful to you. See you later.